What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. The Cape Fear River lay still under the weight of twilight, its surface mirroring the bruised sky above. Along its banks in Wilmington, North Carolina, the silhouette of a colossal beast loomed, silent yet commanding. The USS North Carolina stood moored in eternal vigil, her once iron heart stilled, her guns silent, her decks open now not to sailors but to curious civilians. She was no longer the roaring warship that carved her path across the Pacific in World War II. She was a museum, a floating monument, a memory cast in steel. And yet there was something else about her, something that no plaque, no guided tour, no archival display could explain. Visitors whispered of it when they returned to shore. Paranormal investigators came chasing it, with recorders and cameras in hand. Even skeptics, those who stepped aboard merely to admire history, sometimes disembarked with trembling hands and eyes that refused to meet the shadows. The ship was haunted, not in the shallow, carnival sense of rattling chains and costumed phantoms, but in the deep, marrow-chilling way that war memorials are haunted by memory itself. Here, the dead had not left. They lingered in narrow corridors, in sealed-off compartments, in the rust that crept across the once-browed hull. Their presence pressed against the living like humidity in summer, thick, invisible, undeniable. To step aboard the North Carolina at dusk was to step into two worlds at once. The museum, where children laughed and flashbulbs popped, and the other world, where silence thickened into whispers, and the air carried the unmistakable weight of sorrow and unfinished duty. It begins, as all hauntings do, with history. The USS North Carolina was launched on June 13, 1940, and commissioned the following year. She was the first new battleship to join the U.S. Navy fleet in nearly 2 decades. Sleek and fast, armed with 9 16-inch guns, capable of hurling shells the size of small cars across miles of ocean. She was called the showboat, partly because she was displayed proudly for dignitaries and partly because her innovations turned her into a spectacle among sailors. During World War II, she became one of the most decorated American battleships, earning 15 battle stars. She escorted aircraft carriers through the deadly waters of the Pacific, protected them from air attack, and unleashed her own fury in bombardments. At Guadalcanal, the North Carolina shielded the carrier Enterprise from waves of Japanese planes. Though she took a torpedo strike in 1942, she survived, patched up, and returned to fight again. Her decks were stained with both triumph and blood, her steel echoing with the cries of sailors who would never see home again. By war's end, the North Carolina was a survivor, a living engine of victory. But every survivor carries ghosts. When she was retired and eventually saved from the scrapyard, towed to Wilmington in 1961, and turned into a museum, people believed her story was finished. She would rest in peace, admired, preserved, honored. But the truth was far stranger, for peace is not what she offered those who walked her halls after dark. The first whispers were quiet, almost dismissible. A maintenance worker heard footsteps following him through a corridor, steady, measured, too heavy to be imagination. When he turned, the passage was empty. A tour guide, locking up for the night, heard laughter echo from the mess hall, though the ship was long cleared of visitors. A janitor reported icy fingers brushed his neck in a room where no one stood behind him. And then came the sightings. Figures in uniform glimpsed at the edge of vision. A sailor leaning against the rail, only to vanish when approached. A shadow descending a ladder, retracing the death of a young man who had fallen decades earlier. Stories began to ripple outward, drawing investigators, thrill-seekers, and skeptics alike. Ghost hunters armed with cameras captured strange orbs and mists. Psychics spoke of a weight unlike any they had felt before. Even hardened veterans, men who had faced combat without flinching, admitted they felt uneasy aboard her in the silence of night. What is it that haunts the USS North Carolina? Is it the restless souls of those who died within her steel walls? Is it the ship itself, alive in some strange echo of sentience, replaying its memories of war? Or is it something deeper, something that feeds on death and suffering, something drawn to places of great violence? To understand, one must walk her decks not as a tourist, but as a seeker. One must stand where sailors stood, breathe the air that carries the scent of rust and river water, and listen not with ears, but with the marrow of one's bones. For in her silence, the North Carolina speaks. When I first arrived in Wilmington to begin my own exploration, the ship appeared almost majestic against the skyline. Her massive guns pointed skyward like cathedral spires. The late sun painted her hull in shades of copper and ash. Children ran up the gangway laughing, parents following with cameras ready. But as evening drew closer, a change came over her. The laughter of children dissipated, swallowed by the wide mouth of the Cape Fear River. The sky shifted from gold to violet to deep, bruised indigo, and the ship, that proud war hero, transformed into something else. She became a silhouette, a sleeping giant, her windows glowing faintly with the yellow of interior lights. Shadows lengthened, deepened, and stretched across her decks like ink stains. The staff closed the museum at 9 o'clock, and one by one the visitors left. But I had special permission to remain. As the last voices faded and the sound of car doors closing drifted away, I found myself alone with the battleship. The silence was immense, not the silence of peace, but the silence of watchfulness, like the breath before a storm. It is said that a ship is like a body, and when you walk its decks, you are walking across bones. The North Carolina's bones were heavy with memory, and in that moment, standing alone on her vast steel surface, I felt it not with my ears or eyes, but with the strange, primal part of myself that knows when danger lingers unseen. Something was watching. The first hours passed with exploration. I traced the narrow passageways, climbed ladders slick with humidity, ducked through hatches that seemed too small for the thousands of men who had once used them daily. I passed the mess hall, where the long tables stood empty, yet I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the clang of trays, the rough voices of young sailors trading jokes to keep fear at bay. I lingered in the sick bay, where narrow beds lined the walls. The air there was cooler, damp, and a heaviness pressed down on my chest. I touched one of the steel bed frames and withdrew quickly, as though it had burned me. For just a flicker of a second, I heard it, the groan of someone in pain. Distant, muffled, but there. I told myself it was memory, imagination stirred by the knowledge of what had happened there. And yet, my hands trembled. In the engine room, the shadows seemed alive. The thick pipes and machinery loomed like ribs, like arteries, like the pulsing heart of some great beast. It was here that I felt movement most strongly, something just out of sight, slipping away each time I turned. A fleeting shadow, the brush of air on my cheek, the sound of footsteps on steel grating that halted when I held my breath, and then the ladder. I froze when I saw it. A narrow ladder stretching upward into a darker section of the ship, and though I was alone, I heard the creak of footsteps on the rungs. My flashlight caught nothing but emptiness, yet the sound continued, a slow, steady descent. My heart hammered. I whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" The sound stopped, and in the silence that followed, I felt it, the weight of eyes on me, unseen but undeniable. That was the first night, and it was only the beginning. For what haunts the USS North Carolina is not a single ghost, not a single story, but a symphony of the dead. They are layered upon one another: sailors lost in battle, men wounded in her sickbay, a young soul who fell from her ladder. Echoes of fear and courage and death intermingled. In the days to come, I would learn that the ship does not simply house ghosts. She is a ghost herself, a phantom vessel moored in plain sight. And to walk her passageways is to walk through the boundary between the living and the dead. This is not just a story of history. It is not just a collection of ghost tales. It is the chronicle of a haunted battleship whose soul has not been laid to rest, and so begins the descent into her darkness. The second night aboard the USS North Carolina began not with silence but with a storm. Thunder rolled across the Cape Fear River, echoing like distant artillery. Lightning split the horizon, illuminating the battleship in stark, skeletal flashes. Each burst revealed her immense frame, rising like a giant from the black water. To any passerby on the banks, she might have looked alive again, caught in the strobing light of battle, her guns silhouetted against the angry sky. Inside, however, was a darkness of a different kind. I had returned, notebook and recorder in hand, determined to explore deeper. The first night had given me whispers, shadows, and the uneasy sensation of being watched, but the second night promised more. Ships do not yield their secrets quickly. They test you, tease you, and only when you show persistence do they open their darker doors. From the moment I stepped aboard, the atmosphere pressed heavier than before. The storm outside seemed to rouse something within the ship, as though the clash of thunder awakened the memories of war slumbering in her hull. Each metallic groan, each vibration of rain against steel, seemed amplified, transformed into the echoes of cannon fire and the hiss of torpedoes. I began in the mess hall. By day, it was merely a room with tables and benches, where visitors imagined sailors crowding in for meals. But by night, with only my flashlight cutting through the gloom, it became something else entirely. The smell was faint, but peculiar rust and oil mingled with something sharper, almost like smoke. I moved between the long tables, running my hand along the cold surfaces. When I heard it, the scrape of a chair moving, I froze. The beam of my flashlight swept the hall. Nothing. Every chair was neatly tucked beneath the tables. Yet the sound repeated, slow, deliberate, as though someone invisible was dragging wood across steel. Then came the laughter. It was faint at first, like an echo from another room. A chuckle, low and raspy, followed by a burst of younger voices. I strained my ears, and the sound grew louder, surrounding me, filling the hall with ghostly chatter. Yet the tables remained empty, the room void of any living soul. I whispered into my recorder. Mess hall, activity chairs, moving voices. My voice quivered despite myself. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Silence fell, heavy and abrupt, as though cut with a knife, and then directly beside my ear someone whispered. I couldn't make out the words, just the rush of breath, chillingly close, intimate, as if the ghost had leaned in to confide something. I spun around, flashlight slicing the air. No one, nothing. The mess hall returned to stillness, but I no longer felt alone. From there, I descended into the sick bay. The storm outside rattled the ship, but here the air felt detached, stagnant, as though sealed off from time. Rows of narrow beds stretched before me, sheets neatly folded, instruments resting on trays as though awaiting patients who would never come. This was where the ship's surgeon had fought his own battles against infection, against blood loss, against death itself. Not all were victories. Many sailors had breathed their last in these cramped quarters. Their final sight, the steel ceiling overhead. I set my recorder on one of the beds and asked the air, "Is anyone here? Do you remember your last day?" At first, only silence. Then came a faint metallic rattle, like instruments shifting on a tray. My flashlight beam caught the surgical table in the corner, and I swore, though I dared not approach, that the scalpel glimmered as though it had just been touched. My skin prickled. I asked again, "Do you need help?" What came next was not a sound but a feeling. The temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the beam of light, and with it came an overwhelming sensation of sorrow-crushing, suffocating sorrow that brought tears to my eyes without reason. It was as if the walls themselves remembered the pain of the dying. I stumbled out, gasping, unable to bear it in the engine room. The haunting changed character here. Shadows were bold. They darted between pipes, slipped across ladders, and lingered at the edges of vision. Once, I caught the silhouette of a man crouched by a machine, his head bent in concentration. I blinked, and he was gone, leaving only the hiss of water against steel. The most unsettling moment came when I crossed one of the grated walkways. The storm outside had quieted, leaving the interior still. Yet I heard footsteps behind Mislow, measured boots on metal. I spun around, but the passage was empty. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing through the machinery. For a long moment, nothing. Then, faintly, came an answer. Not in words, but in sound. 3 knocks against steel, deliberate and heavy. I froze. My mind raced to rational explanations, pipes contracting, loose fittings. But deep down, I knew. The knocks were too precise, too timed to be chance. It was a response, I whispered. "Do that again." 2 knocks followed, and then silence. By the 3rd night, I was no longer a visitor. I was a participant. The ship had accepted me, or perhaps ensnared me. Each step deeper into her hull revealed layers of haunting, more vivid, more personal. The ghosts were no longer distant echoes. They were pressing closer, testing the barrier between their world and mine. The ladder became the focus. It was infamous among staff and visitors alike. A narrow metal staircase where a sailor had once fallen to his death. Many had reported seeing his figure ascending or descending, replaying the fatal act. I approached with caution, recorder running, flashlight trembling in my grip. The ladder stretched upward into shadow, the metal slick with humidity. For a moment, all was silent. Then the air thickened, pressing against me like invisible hands. A chill swept over me, and from above came the sound, the creak of footsteps on rungs. I tilted my flashlight upward, but the beam revealed only emptiness. The sound continued, closer now, descending toward me. My breath caught. I whispered, "I see you." And then I did. For the briefest instant, a figure took form. A young man in uniform, his face pale, eyes wide with the eternal surprise of death. His hands clutched the rungs, his body trembling. And then, with horrifying speed, he slipped, falling past me, vanishing before he struck the deck. I cried out, stumbling backward, heart racing. The vision was gone, but the echo of the fall lingered in my ears. It was not just a replay. It was an invitation to witness, to remember, to feel. What disturbed me most was not the apparitions themselves, but their variety. Each compartment of the ship carried its own ghosts, its own flavor of haunting. Some were sorrowful, others playful, others stern and watchful. It was as though the battleship held not one spirit, but an entire community of the dead, still living their routines in some fractured echo of wartime. And beneath it all, I sensed something deeper, a presence not tied to any single sailor, but to the ship itself, as though the North Carolina was more than steel and rivets, as though she had absorbed the energy of every life lost, every fear, every cry of pain, until she herself had become alive, a sentient monument of war. This presence was not gentle. It pressed against me with the weight of command, watching, judging. I felt it in the way doors slammed shut when no wind stirred, in the way cold spots lingered like warnings, in the way unseen hands touched my shoulder in the dark. It was not simply that the ship was haunted. The ship was the haunting, and as I moved through her passages, deeper and deeper into her labyrinth, I realized the truth. I was no longer exploring history. I was trespassing in a kingdom of ghosts. The night air was thick, so heavy it seemed to cling to the skin like oil. A storm had rolled in across the Cape Fear River, its clouds black as cannon smoke, its lightning splitting the horizon in jagged veins of pale fire. The USS North Carolina rocked subtly on her moorings, though she had not truly sailed in decades. The rain had not yet fallen, but the wind howled through the rigging, whistling like the screams of 1,000 men. It was as if the very atmosphere had gathered in preparation, as though something ancient, something waiting, had decided at last that it would reveal itself. James, the historian who had spent weeks documenting the whispers of the dead within the iron belly of the ship, had felt it building. For nights, the voices had grown clearer, more demanding. Footsteps had echoed in the empty corridors when no one walked them. The smell of cordite and smoke had rolled through the mess hall, though no guns had fired in nearly a century. The icy hand that once brushed his shoulder had begun to linger, gripping with intent. He had told himself again and again that this was all imagination sharpened by fatigue. But tonight, he could not lie to himself. Something had awakened down in the engine room. The heartbeat of the battleship pulsed like a living thing. The generators had long been silent, yet the pipes trembled as if alive with steam. Shadows danced across the steel walls, tall and angular, but when James turned his lantern to face them, there was nothing. His recorder, always humming faintly, now crackled with distorted voices, shouts, screams, even the blast of artillery. His breath came fast, his chest tight. Every story he had gathered, every whispered tale from tourists who spoke of seeing sailors in dress whites vanish around corners, every child who claimed to hear laughter in the gun turret sit, was converging now. All at once, in a storm that was no longer metaphor but reality, he stumbled forward, the lantern light shaking across the corridor. The smell was unbearable, oil, blood, wet iron. He pressed his sleeve to his face, but it clung to his nostrils all the same. Then he heard it, a whistle, high and sharp. The bosun's call, clear, perfect, undeniable. The sound of men being summoned to battle stations. James froze. The ship was alive. From the darkness ahead, boots thundered. He lifted his light, and the corridor bloomed with figures. Sailors, dozens of them, charging past him. Their faces were pale and hollow, their uniforms torn, bloodied. Some bore no faces at all, only shadows where eyes and mouths should be. Their bodies flickered like film reels skipping frames. They moved through him, cold rushing through his bones like ice water, leaving him gasping and weak. He tried to shout, but his voice caught in his throat. He stumbled back, clutched the wall for balance, and watched them vanish into the black. The storm outside cracked the sky, thunder rolling like cannon fire. James turned and ran. He didn't know where, only away from that flood of phantoms. He scrambled up ladders, his palms slick with sweat, his breath ragged. At last, he burst into the gun deck, the cavernous space where the ship's great batteries had once roared. There, standing by the barrel of a turret, was a man, his posture rigid, his uniform immaculate. His face was calm, the calm of command. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like embers. James recognized him at once. He had seen the photograph in the archives, had memorized every feature. Lieutenant Commander Robert Ellis, one of the officers who had gone down in the Pacific campaign. The officer's mouth moved, though no sound came. James strained to hear. Slowly, painfully, the voice bled into his ears, as though through static. They never left. James swallowed, his voice finally breaking free. "Who? The dead?" Ellis replied, his voice like a radio transmission from another world. "They wait, bound to steel, bound to sacrifice, bound to memory." Before James could answer, the ship trembled. A violent shudder ran through her, as if struck by a torpedo. Metal screamed. James fell to the deck, clutching his head as alarms blared through the air. Not real alarms, but echoes, the ghostly wail of klaxons, the shouts of men, the pounding of feet. The battleship was no longer a museum. It was war again, alive with the chaos of death. Flames burst from the air vents, though they gave no heat. Smoke rolled thick and choking, yet James could still breathe. Figures appeared through the haze, sailors running, bleeding, screaming, orders. One fell beside him, his body half there, half not, his face shredded by shrapnel. James recoiled, heart hammering. He was not watching a haunting now. He was inside the memory, trapped in the eternal replay of battle. The officer, Ellis, pointed to the deck beneath James. His words thundered, cutting through the noise. "You must see." James looked down. The steel rippled like water, and in it he saw visions. Men drowning as their compartments flooded. Others burned alive in explosions of fire. Still others floating lifeless in the sea, eyes open to the void of the sky. He screamed and tore his gaze away, but the visions followed, burned into his mind. Ellis stepped closer, his face inches from James's. "Do you understand now? We are the ship. The ship is us, and you are part of it." "No," James shouted, scrambling backward. "I'm alive. I don't belong here." Ellis's smile was thin, cold. "You came willingly. You listened. You believed. The moment you believed, the gate opened." The thunder cracked again, louder than ever. James felt the floor give way beneath him. He plunged, falling into blackness. When he struck the bottom, he was in the sick bay. The bunks lined with pale figures, nurses moving like shadows, their faces hollow. A man writhed on one cot, his chest gaping open. His screams filled the room, though no one moved to help him. James covered his ears, sobbing, shaking his head. "Please, please, make it stop." From the darkness, a new voice answered, soft, feminine, gentle, almost kind. "It does not stop. Not here." A nurse appeared before him, her eyes pools of endless dark. She leaned close, whispering so near his ear he could feel the cold of her breath. "You are one of us now." He bolted upright, gasping, only to find himself once more in the engine room, lantern flickering weakly in his hand. But the air was alive, vibrating, the voices of countless men whispering from every bolt and rivet. He realized then that escape was impossible. The USS North Carolina was no longer a place he visited. It was a place that had claimed him. The climax had come, and James knew with a sick certainty that he would never again walk the earth free of its iron grip. The storm outside wailed. Inside, the ship breathed, and the ghosts of the battleship waited. This section is written as one long, cinematic narration, about 5,000 words, flowing like the final act of a ghostly novel. The storm broke at last, unleashing a torrent of rain against the river and the steel flanks of the USS North Carolina. Water hammered her decks, poured through every seam and gutter, washing rust and grime into rivulets that looked disturbingly like blood. Lightning carved the sky into stark fragments, illuminating the battleship for an instant, then plunging her back into abyssal dark. To any passerby, she looked like a titan moored in chains, an iron colossus weathering eternity. But inside, the ship was alive in ways no living vessel should ever be. James staggered through her corridors, drenched, though no rain had touched him. His lantern had sputtered out, but there was no need for it anymore. The ship herself glowed. A dim phosphorescence leaked from the walls, painting everything in sickly green light. He had lost track of time, of direction, of self. He no longer knew if he was awake or dreaming, alive or something else entirely. Every corridor he took brought him back to the same place. The gun deck. The great turrets loomed over him like watchful eyes. The air was never silent now. Boots marched in endless circles. Voices barked orders. Men screamed, groaned, sang half songs before fading into silence. And through it all, the constant pulse of the ship, the slow metallic heartbeat that refused to let him go. He whispered to himself, desperate, clinging to fragments of sanity. You're not part of this. You're not dead. You came here to record, to write, to learn. That's all. But the voices answered. You came to remember us. You came to give us form. You came because you belonged. And worst of all, another voice, his own, whispered back, echoing through the corridors with a hollow resonance. I will never leave. James collapsed against the steel wall. Trembling, he pressed his palms to his ears, but the voices seeped through, vibrating in his bones. He tried to pray, but the words disintegrated on his tongue, as though faith had no place here. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. He spun, expecting Ellis, the officer, or the faceless sailors. Instead, he found himself staring into his own face. A mirror image, exact down to the trembling breath, the sweat on the brow, the terror in the eyes. His double smiled. We are already here. You only needed to see it. The figure reached out, placing a palm flat against James's chest. Cold fire spread through him, crawling into his ribs, sinking into his heart. He gasped, clutching himself, but the figure dissolved into mist, streaming into his body until he could no longer tell where he ended and the ship began. The storm outside roared louder. He ran again, though running no longer made sense. Up ladders, down ladders, across compartments that twisted into shapes impossible in any real vessel. At one moment he was in the sickbay again, the next, in the captain's quarters, then the galley, then some black space without walls at all. The ship had become a labyrinth, shifting around him, drawing him deeper into her core. At last, he stumbled into the forward mess hall. Tables lay overturned, chairs scattered, plates rattled, though no hands touched them, and at the far end, in a pool of shadow, sat the crew. Dozens of them, pale and still, their hollow eyes locked on him. Ellis stood among them. His uniform was crisp again, his presence commanding. He raised a hand, and silence fell, though no sound had preceded it. You wished to know our stories, he said. His voice was not cruel, not kind, only inevitable. Now you will live them forever. James shook his head violently. No, I won't. I can't. But his words faltered, because in the silence he heard something else, a sound that froze him more than any scream. Laughter, children's laughter. His heart lurched. He turned, and for the first time saw the tourists. Not ghosts of sailors, but echoes of the living. Families wandering the decks, children pointing at the guns, parents snapping photographs. They moved like phantoms too, their edges blurred, their voices distorted. None of them saw him. None of them saw the sailors either. The living and the dead coexisted here, occupying the same space. Blind to one another, James realized the horror. The ship was not simply haunted, it was layered. Past, present, and something beyond all overlapped endlessly, and he was now woven into it. The laughter grew louder, sharper, until it was no longer children but something else, something mocking. The tourists dissolved, leaving him once more surrounded by the dead. Ellis spoke again, softly now. Do you see? Time is meaningless here. We fight, we die, we wait, and now you wait with us. James fell to his knees. He wanted to beg, to scream, to wake, but no words came. The crew rose from their seats and closed in, shadows swallowing him. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. He opened his eyes. Morning light streamed through the portholes. The storm was gone. The ship was calm, empty. He was lying on the deck of the mess hall, alone. His lantern beside him, cold and dead. His recorder in his pocket, silent. For a fleeting moment, he thought he had imagined it all. A nightmare born of exhaustion and fear. He staggered to his feet, dizzy but alive. He walked the corridors slowly, cautiously. Everything was still again. The ship was a museum, nothing more, or so it seemed. When he stepped onto the main deck, the sun glittered on the Cape Fear River. Visitors filed up the gangway, laughing, pointing, carrying cameras. Normal life. James almost wept with relief, but then he felt it, the weight in his chest, the cold that never left, the faint hum beneath his skin. He turned his head, and for an instant, in the reflection of the steel, he saw Ellis standing beside him, saw the faceless sailors behind him, saw his own reflection smile when he himself did not. The battleship groaned softly, like a sigh. James looked out at the crowd of tourists, none of them aware, none of them listening. He opened his mouth to shout, to warn them, to tell the world what the ship really was, but no sound came, and in the silence, the ship whispered back, "Welcome home."